The oldest living things on Earth are beginning to disappear. Trees have long been considered the watchers of the world and of time. Some have lived long enough to witness the Roman Empire rise, sprouted before the Black Death, survived world wars, were already ancient when the Vikings first landed in England, and silently watched as man learned to read and write. For thousands of years, we believed they'd always be there, alive and watching. But ancient stories warned that when the oldest trees began to perish, something is seriously wrong. For the past decade, we've watched that very warning play out rapidly in real time, and we don't know why. Why are groves of ancient trees dying? What axe could possibly be strong enough to fell one that lived through millennia? Could ancient trees really live forever? Why do cultures throughout the ages and across virtually every continent describe them as sacred guardians? And what's happening now in the world to awaken those ancient warnings? Join me as we unravel all this and much more and enter the Codex Legendarium. I'm Shelby Melanson. The Methuselah tree, a great basin bristlecone growing in the White Mountains of California, and named after the Bible figure cited as the oldest person to ever live. The tree is now confirmed at roughly 4,855 years old, meaning it sprouted before the first stones were laid at the Great Pyramid of Giza and Stonehenge, at least based on what mainstream science says. Madagascar's oldest baobab trees live on and even flower for an estimated 3,000-year lifespan. Local legend says the olive tree of Uves, named after its home in a Greek village, sprouted nearly 6,000 years ago. Other ancient olives live on in Italy, Lebanon, and Palestine too. Jomon sugi, a Japanese cedar tree named for its possible existence during the prehistoric Jomon period, is believed to be anywhere from 2 to over 7,000 years old. But something terrible is happening. Groves of ancient trees are dying. This past spring, a troubling discovery was made in the woods north of Nottinghamshire, England. Deep within Sherwood Forest, while most of the trees there were busy turning green, one in particular had failed to put out new leaves, and not long after was declared dead. But this was no ordinary tree. It was Major Oak, an ancient English oak that had sprouted more than 1,200 years ago, or roughly the beginning of the Viking Age, when longships were just appearing over the horizon, castles hadn't yet been built, and London was a small riverside town made of wooden buildings. If the name Sherwood Forest sounds familiar, it's probably because it was once royal territory and a hideout for outlaws, specifically Robin Hood and his famous bow and arrow. You probably know his story since it's one of England's most prolific tales of folklore ever. But what you may not know is that Major Oak was said to be Robin Hood's actual hideout, as in he and his companions, the Merry Men, as in Friar Tuck and Little John, would take shelter in the hollowed-out core of the still-living, enormous tree, mostly to avoid the Sheriff of Nottingham. But now, the tree is dead, and the conservation charity that manages Sherwood Forest says it doesn't know why. More on that one in a second. Major Oak's unexplained death sent out ripple effects, with people mourning the tree and its legacy. But here's where the rabbit hole really begins. Logically, you'd assume it's not every day that a 1,000-year-old tree passes on, right? Because there just aren't that many of them out there. But after Major Oak's story caught my eye and I dove deeper into it, I realized something that's equal parts weird and terrible. Many, many ancient trees are dying, all at once. Remember Africa's ancient baobab trees that we mentioned before? Back in 2018, a paper titled "The Demise of the Largest and Oldest African Baobabs" was published in Nature. It describes how 9 out of the 13 oldest and 5 out of the 6 largest had died within just the past 12 years. And quote, "The cause of the mortalities is still unclear." The sudden death march puzzled scientists. Was it climate stress, lack of water, internal structural collapse? But none of those explanations, or even the combinations of them, fit quite right. The odds of their untimely deaths were roughly the equivalent of flipping a coin 100 times and getting all heads. It just doesn't happen. According to one of the study's co-authors, quote, "Scientifically, it is impossible for trees which have an age limit of over 2,000 years to die in such a large number over such a short time span." Okay, super weird, but that's happening way over there in Africa, right? Oh wait, no, it's not. It's happening right here in the US too. Researchers published this paper last year, titled "Significant Mortality of Old Trees Across a Dry Forest Landscape, Oregon, USA." During the 12 years from 2012 to 2023, 1 in 4 trees that is 300 years or older has perished in the area. Not only that, the younger trees aren't growing like they used to, and the rate of replacement for the old trees is just plummeting. Now, obviously, hundreds of years old is a far cry from thousands of years old. But you can see the trend. And just in case you need more, the ancient sequoia trees of California are going up in flames, literally. These giant redwoods often live to see their 1, 2, or 3,000 year birthdays. Some have even been recorded at 3,200 years old. Yet, 20% of them, 1 in 5, have been lost since just 2015. And if that wasn't bad enough, major wildfires in 2020 and 2021 killed off another 10 to 13,000 giant sequoias total, roughly 13 to 19% of the entire population. So, you can imagine there were probably a fair few ancient ones lost among them, too. Across the pond in Italy, ancient olive trees are facing a similar plight, a disease that's killed at least a third of the nation's 60 million olive trees. Not to mention in Greece, where in some cases, 2,000-year-old trees were cut down and burned as firewood, or to make room for more farmland because of economic crisis. I know, insane. To top all that off, what if I told you that there is a tree still alive that is 80,000 years old? His name is Pando, and unfortunately, he too is dying. Okay, he's not technically one tree. He's 47,000 of the exact same genetically identical quaking aspen tree, all growing from one singular organism's root system, and taking up 107 acres of Utah's Fish Lake National Forest. Pando weighs 13 million pounds and is the world's largest organism by mass. Which makes sense, since Pando is Latin for I spread, as in my roots spread by sending out new tree sprouts from them and creating what's aptly known as a clone. But surely, an entity this massive and this ancient, which would have sprouted during Earth's ice age, by the way, couldn't be just taken down so easily, right? Well, researchers published this in 2018, stating that Pando isn't regenerating in the way that he should. They looked at surveys of the enormous tree system from 2011 all the way back to 1939, and found that next to no young trees are sprouting from the prehistoric giant anymore. Meaning, as the older trees die off, those sections of the forest are just thinning out. For thousands of years, these trees have withstood climate extremes, changing atmospheres and soil biomes, new kinds of pests, heat waves, droughts, fires, and just about everything else under the sun, literally. Which begs the question, do these trees have natural expiration dates like most plants, animals, and people? Or are they immortal? Or are they just immune to old age and only face mortality when it's brought on from the outside? Tree lifespans vary dramatically by species. On the short end, peaches and willows live for around 10 to 20 years. Palm trees see around 50 to 80 years, while oaks, maples, and pines range from 100 to, in some cases, 200 or even 500 years. But a handful of ancient species, giant sequoias, yews, and bristlecone pines especially, reach 1, 3, or even 5,000 years with ease, let alone clonal colonies like Pando the tree. These species, along with a small handful of turtles, tortoises, and jellyfish, have what science calls negligible senescence, aka super slow aging. They don't lose the ability to reproduce with age, and the speed their cells degenerate doesn't eventually outpace their rate of renewal. Mostly because, think about this, as a human, you can't regrow a heart or a brain when yours gets too old. But the trees can constantly put out new roots, branches, and leaves, and can regrow their vascular tissue, the part of the tree's trunk that is alive and transports water and nutrients. So, according to science, these trees never become biologically old like we do. And theoretically, given perfect conditions, certain trees could live on for not only thousands, but maybe even millions of years. So, if not old age, what could possibly fell a tree so ancient that it not only predates generations, but even history as we know it? Why are the oldest among them suddenly dying right now? Despite having no traditional biological clock, ancient trees do face other challenges. Some scientists cite things like hydraulic failure, because pulling water up from the ground into a 10-foot tall tree is a heck of a lot easier than pulling water up 250 feet into a giant sequoia. Likewise, the bigger you are, the heavier, and the easier for you to collapse under your own weight. But what about the mysterious sudden deaths of our ancient trees that have scientists scratching their heads? For Italy's ancient olive trees, the answer is mostly disease, like we mentioned before. And in Greece, it's apparently people with axes. I mean, come on, can you imagine a 2,000-year-old tree as firewood? But, okay, what about the rest of them? For major oak, conservationists say that their best guess is a combination of climate factors like heat waves and something I find much more interesting. Years of, quote, well-intentioned structural intervention and huge amounts of human activity. As it turns out, they'd been trying to help the tree by adding in structural supports over the years. Unfortunately, they had the opposite effect. But what's more is that ever since a British soldier named Major Hayman Rooke wrote about the tree and its legacy in Sherwood Forest in his 1790 book, tourists started flocking to see this tree. And year after year of footfalls may have compacted the soil enough, aka so much, that the tree couldn't properly absorb nutrients anymore. Both of these were considered, and I quote, major contributors by the society that oversees the forest to the tree's death. Likewise, the same giant sequoias that normally need fire to help them reproduce are now dying by the same force. Scorching the tree's cones actually gets them to open up and reveal their seeds, just so you know. And then there's Pando in Utah, where the US Forest Service allows cattle ranchers to let their animals graze on Pando's sprouts for roughly 2 weeks every year. Which sounds like a small thing, but it might explain partly why young trees aren't coming up in the way that they used to. They're getting eaten. Now listen, I am a huge proponent of protecting nature, but I also don't believe that humans shouldn't be able to expand and grow as well. That said, I do think all of this is worth a minute of reflection on why, all of a sudden, living things that have survived for thousands or even tens of thousands of years are suddenly vanishing from our world. And if you've been watching this show for a while, you'll know that I tend to think back on ancient storytelling as part of that reflection. Virtually every civilization in the world throughout all of history has told stories of gigantic, ancient, and sacred trees. None of them worshipped mountains in the same way, or lakes, or rivers, or caves. They saw trees differently, as beings in a unique kind of middle ground between humans and nature itself. And I think we still do. The Druids of Celtic tradition considered revered old oaks as the king of trees. They were sacred and believed to function as an axis mundi, or world axis. In other words, linking the heavens through its canopy of leaves, to the earth through its trunk, and to the underworld through its roots. The trees were also used for spiritual rituals and thought of as the favorite of Jupiter, aka Zeus, the king of the gods. The Greeks took that a step further, believing that Zeus whispered messages through the rustling leaves of a sacred oak tree, said to be the home of the oracle Dodona. Just like the Druids, Norse myth describes Yggdrasil, the world tree, as not only connecting but holding up the entire 9 realms, including heaven and earth. Interestingly, the world tree was prophesied to weaken right before Ragnarok. Hopefully, the same is not true for Major Oak and the sequoias. Japanese Shinto traditions also embrace sacred trees called shimbuku, which nature spirits are said to live inside of. Africa's baobabs are likewise seen as spirit trees, including the ancient ones that we talked about earlier. While over in India, Buddha Shakyamuni, or Siddhartha, was said to have achieved enlightenment while meditating beneath a sacred fig tree, the Bodhi tree. Turning back to mythology here, the great wizard Merlin, a legendary prophet and magician from King Arthur's time, was said to be either imprisoned inside or transformed into a tree at one point, though he could still speak even in that form. He was allegedly imprisoned there by his student and his love, Nimue, also known as Vivian or the Lady of the Lake. And also, side note, I don't know about you, but the whole wizard inside of a tree thing, it doesn't really get more trees or magic than that. And beyond that, obviously this part is pop culture and fiction, but don't even get me started on Tolkien's magical trees. Ents, the White Tree of Gondor, Old Man Willow, the 2 trees of Valinor. Some benevolent, some sacred, and some straight up terrifying. But all of them intelligent. Not to mention a whole bunch of other fun references like these. Even if you don't subscribe to the spiritual side of those traditions, it's easy to see why they exist. Think about this. Towering grand entities that oversee entire forests, or even entire civilizations that don't naturally age and can learn and have memory. If you need proof of those last 2, check out how Venus flytraps or sensitive mimosa plants snap shut once they're touched. On top of that, trees have entire communication networks underground called mycorrhizal networks that can send advanced signals back and forth, both to other trees and fungi linked to them. This all happens via something scientists affectionately named, and I kid you not, the Wood Wide Web. Plus, trees can recognize people, according to a really fascinating series of experiments from the book The Secret Life of Plants. I am still working on an episode all about that one, but in the meantime, I talk a lot about all of this here. Plus, when giant trees die, particularly the oldest and largest in a given mycorrhizal network, it has major ramifications. Ancient trees support thousands of insects, plus birds, bats, mosses, fungi, microbes, and much more. In other words, when one of them dies, an entire world dies with it. The trees around it also feel that loss, and by that measure, the entire forest probably does too. They're called mother trees for a reason, after all. So, the whole time I was working on this episode, I just couldn't get away from the fact that one particular story in pop culture, I feel, sums up this whole situation plus thousands of years of tree mythology just better than anything else. Seriously, hear me out, Zelda. In Ocarina of Time, the Great Deku Tree is much more than a gigantic tree with a face. He's a guardian deity, a sentient spirit who protects the forest and everyone in it. He's also the entire foundation of the forest, and a historian of the ancient land that he grows from, going all the way back to when the gods created that land, because he lived long enough to witness it all himself. But when Link arrives to meet the Deku Tree, he's dying. He tells Link that he's been cursed, and an evil parasitic spider is draining his life force from the inside. So, naturally, Link goes inside the tree, defeats the parasite queen Goma, and comes out again. But the great tree dies anyway. But not before giving Link the spiritual stone of the forest, a colorful gem filled with supernormal powers and a prophecy that the hero of the land would collect 3 of those such stones. From across mythology to history and religious tradition, and then reflected back into pop culture, when an ancient tree dies, it always signals that something in the world at large is seriously wrong. That symbolism has survived for thousands of years. So whether it's Ganondorf taking over the world, or a disturbance of the ecological balance, aka droughts, fires, or people just not being respectful or leaving well enough alone, it's worth taking a second to just look at what's going on. If the ancients believed something was wrong when a great tree dies, maybe we should stop and think for a moment when groves of them worldwide are starting to perish. All that said, there is a beacon of hope. No, but seriously, hear me out. This is real philosophy here by way of Ocarina of Time. By lifting the curse on the forest temple, the Deku Tree was able to produce a sprout, the next generation of ancient trees, the next guardian and historian of the forest. In real life, the same thing is happening with Major Oak. The Conservation Society in charge of Sherwood Forest has confirmed that while the tree is gone, saplings taken from it have been planted all over the world, meaning its legacy can and will live on, so long as we take proper care of it. The Buddha's sacred Bodhi tree in India is the exact same story. The original was damaged multiple times over the millennia and eventually destroyed, but cuttings of it, direct descendants I mean, live on, one in Sri Lanka and the other still in India. All of that in real life also reflects the mythology. The World Tree from Norse tradition did actually weaken during the cataclysmic events of Ragnarok, aka the end of the world, and the deaths of many gods. But when the world was reborn, the tree regains its strength and represents the birth of cosmic unity of a new era. Imagine if ancient trees could speak. A baobab older than the Magna Carta, a bristlecone that came before Moses, an olive tree alive during the Roman Republic, silent witnesses to wars, empires, the creation of entire languages, religions, and civilizations. Living libraries of genetic, ecological, and cultural history. Beings that lived long enough to see all of that, plus, say, the internet and space exploration all in one lifetime. But those witnesses are beginning to disappear. And if that's true, maybe the question isn't what the world is losing. Maybe it's whether we're only now realizing what they meant to us in the first place. But what do you think? If ancient trees could speak, what would they say? And what does all of this say about the world we live in right now? Are the deaths of these ancient trees just a terrible statistical coincidence? Or were the ancients right? And there's something seriously wrong that the trees are trying to tell us about? I would love to hear your thoughts all about this in the comments, and if you have an idea for something you'd like to see a future episode on, let me know. And of course, if you enjoyed this deep dive into mysteries, myths, culture, and science, please take just a second to like and share this video, hit the hype button, and if you want to see more, subscribe. It really helps get the word out there about the show. Until next time, stay curious and stay legendary. And real quick, before you go, YouTube thinks you will like this video next, so you might want to check it out. Thank you.